Good morning. Going back to our discussion on the three Nefashos, right? We're in the middle of learning Tanya. We took a break at chapter 10, because in chapter 10, after the Alter Rebbe explains at length uh, the godly soul and the animal soul and what they each want. He then goes on to say that the person can give strength to his godly soul to overpower his animal soul. Now, that phrase introduced us to three entities: the person, entity one, who makes his animal godly soul, entity two, overpower his animal soul, entity three, which confuses us a little bit, rightfully, because we only learned about two souls. But then the Alter Rebbe says there's another person who's choosing between one and the other two. So who's this third person? So we started explaining a little bit before we had to absorb the rabbi's class for a week. We started explaining how the souls work and what the souls mean. So just recap a little bit quickly. So we used our babushka model, and we explained that a nefesh, we use the word nefesh, we translate it as a conscious, not a soul, because a soul, as we still learned at the beginning, neshama is a soul, which is like an abstract spiritual entity, and a nefesh is the way I experience it in my mind, in my conscious. So just the feeling that I exist, feelings of me, conscious, I feel, I want, the I that you keep on talking about. That's a nefesh. I feel my fingers, I want, I live, that's a nefesh. So we explained how each of the nefesh should not be seen as disparate from the others. Like, we're not split personalities. We feel like one singular I. It's just layers. It's one inside the other, right? We gave the analogy of how you can have one experience, but if you dig into it, you can find layer after layer after layer, right? The analogy we gave was a parent gives a kiss to the child, inside of which is the parent's love, inside of which is the awareness that the kid did something cute, inside of which is the essential attachment. This is my kid, right? It's all one experience, but it's just layers of, and there's many more layers, but that's just an outline to give an idea how one thing can have multiple layers. So you look at one single individual, and what's he motivated by? Well, it depends how deep you go. If you begin with Nefesh Bahamas, what's he motivated by? Staying alive. Dig a little deeper, that would be Chiyunis, right? Give three names to the Nefesh Bahamas: Chiyunis, Tivis, and Bahamas. Chiyunis is alive. I want to stay alive. Dig a little deeper. Okay, I have certain natural tendencies because I want to stay alive, right? I stay away from. I want to have children. I want to eat. Whatever the natural desires that come along with wanting to stay alive are. Dig a little deeper. I want to stay away from pain and pursue pleasure. It's a little more animalistic. You dig a little deeper. Now we're getting to another nefesh. There's a rationality to it. I'm a human being, and human beings have rationality. I'm capable of thinking in the abstract, not just what I want and what I don't like. I'm capable of thinking about mathematics, morality, philosophy. These aren't necessarily godly. They're human thinking, but it's not necessarily only animalistic in the sense that cows don't think about the morality, or the lions don't think about the morality of eating gazelle. Only humans are perverted enough to think about the morality of eating cows. No, but that itself shows you that we're capable of morality beyond the self. Everything has to have its redemptive quality. We should know this. So even the notion of extreme vegetarianism actually comes from it's a very strong indication that humans aren't just animals. Because if we were only animals, why are we even hypothesizing that we shouldn't eat animals? Why not? Every other animal on the planet eats other animals. That's how they survive. So if all we are is animals, forget godly. If all we are is animals, then eat other animals. Why is that different than any other animal that eat? Lions are not philosophizing about whether it's right to kill gazelle. They survive by eating gazelle, so they eat the gazelle. It's not even a shiloh, right? But we're rational beings, right? So even the most secularist version of humanity sees humanity as separate from nature. There's something beyond just the natural order where we're rational. And if we shouldn't be eating cows, let's just say, eat your cows. I'm just making the point that there's another layer to the human experience, right? And this is not exclusive to Jews. This is true of all humans. Okay. Now, someone who watched the video asked me if I'm saying that the nefesh hasichlis, the rational conscious, is that seichel? Yes and no. And this will help us understand the godly soul. And for that, we'll go to the other page. Yeah, the second page there, where it has machshava de b'maisa, yeah? Okay. Okay, so a nefesh, which is a conscious, in the words that I'll have, we'll simplify it, and we'll say it has, because there are subconscious layers also, but we're leaving the subconscious out for now. Just the conscious experience has three components. Two are the way it experiences itself, or its own self, and the third is the way it is expressed outward. And again, they're all hislapshus. They're all one invested in the other. So the three are as follows. If you look at the left, there's like that diagram that you see. It's Kabbalistic. These are all.
It's from Kabbalah.
Yeah. These are all. So here, Keser and Das are both counted. There's actually a principle in Kabbalah. I found this online, but in Kabbalah, there's a principle which Chassidus quotes: Kishat Keser nimna ina Das nimna, ukshat Das nimna ina Keser nimna. If you include Das in the list, you don't put Keser, and if you include Keser, you don't put Das. On the list, I put both here. But we're not gonna go down there right now. We're staying very broad strokes, which is as follows. Look at the left. There's like that little squiggly line there. The first, you see, on all the way on the left, yeah, is moichin, intelligence. The intelligence is comprised of these four first components: keser, chachma, bina, das. In the language of Chassidus, because again, I just said the principle is that if das is there, you don't put keser in, and if keser is there, you don't put das in. The language of Chassidus, you'd only have chachma, bina, das. Keser would be the subconscious, so we're going to put that aside. But it's moichin, it's intelligence. That's component one. Component two is midos, my emotions. And the emotions are comprised of the lower seven. I'm not breaking down what they all are, but there's the intelligence and the emotions. We all know this intuitively, right? Now, here's the irony about intelligence and emotions. Yeah, I'll explain that in a second. It's just by the arrow is pointing at Malchus. I'll explain that in a second. So here's the irony about intelligence and emotions. Intelligence and emotions are simultaneously dependent on each other and opposite to each other. They're opposite to each other in the sense that intelligence is all, or at least should be, completely objective. That's what intelligence is. Emotions are the exact opposite, all completely subjective. That's the nature of emotions. How do I feel? Right? So they're opposite in that sense. True intelligence is what's the truth, irrespective of how I feel about it. And true emotion is how do I feel about it, irrespective of whether it's the truth or not. It doesn't make a difference if this is right or wrong. That's how I feel. That's the nature of a feeling. So they're opposite to each other in essence. On the other hand, ironically, they need each other, right? If I don't care, I'm not motivated to discover anything, right? A computer, which is a completely intellectual, is not motivated to pursue any knowledge unless I tell it to, because it's a tool, right? So the brain, without an emotion, is just a tool, and it'll sit idly until someone uses it. It's like it doesn't feel compelled to do anything. It's what makes me curious. That's really an emotional thing because that's a subjective experience. I'm curious. So the mind is dependent on an emotion to actually decide to do something with it. And the same thing, the emotion is dependent on the mind. What is worthy of getting angry at? What's worthy of getting happy about? Well, that'll depend on your level of understanding. Like we spoke about this a long time ago. The 2-year-old kid who's upset about the 1-year-old car that's broken, and the 50-year-old who's upset about the $50,000 car is broken, right? Because their mind tells them what's worthy of getting angry about or happy about. So they're opposite to each other in that emotions are subjective and intelligence is objective, but they require each other to exist. Right? It's the emotions that motivate the mind to pursue anything, and it's the mind that will shape what I feel about. Okay, so now every nefesh, whether it's the animal soul, whether it's the godly soul, whether it's the rational soul, will have this whole entire system. All of it, intelligence and emotion. It's just a question of what is it being used for and what's its dominant overall feature. So in the animal soul, the overall feature is survival, or a little deeper, the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of pleasure. Everything will be wrapped around that. Its intelligence will be about that, finding out what's pleasurable and what's painful. Right? Its emotions will certainly be about that. I love that because it brings me pleasure. I hate that because it makes me bring me pain. Right? So the nefesh Bahamas, the animal soul, will have the intelligence and emotions, but all under the great guise of its ultimate goal, which is animalistic pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain. Right? Now, the same thing is true of the rational soul. The rational soul, the Nefesh HaSichlis, which is predominantly rational, but also has this whole system. It also has intelligence and emotions. But its intelligence and emotions are about the pursuit of knowledge. So the intelligence certainly will be dominant here because it's all about pursuing knowledge. It's just say a philosopher or a scientist or something like that, someone pursuing not necessarily godly intellectuality, but just intellectuality as a whole. It's very broad. A scientist, a philosopher, even a politician to some degree. Okay, let's just assume he's not, or at least a political theorist, not a politician. Maybe they're pursued by money or power, or whatever. But someone who's thinking about life or anything, right, also has that rational self also has emotions and intelligence. It certainly has intelligence, but even emotions on two grounds. First of all, the emotions will motivate the mind, like we were saying before, to motivate the mind to actually pursue something. This brings my curiosity, right? So that's already an emotional component to the intellectual, to the rational soul, to the Nefesh HaSichlos. But there's another part to it, which is the seichel, the mind, the rational soul, let's say concludes that that in this scenario, the moral thing to do is X. Right? So now, once it concludes the moral thing to do is X, it's now making a comment not on the rationalization, but on the supposed outcome. Right? Pure rationalization can spend forever thinking about the ups and downs of behaving this way or behaving that way, but it'll never come to the conclusion which way you should behave. Which way you should? It's not my job as a rational being. My job as a rational being is just to analyze the data. Like a computer. A computer doesn't tell you how you should behave or shouldn't behave. It'll analyze the data you input, and that's it. Even the greatest of AIs. Like if you ask an AI, literally, if you ask the AI what's the moral way to behave in X situation, it'll give you a summary of all the philosophical theories about how to behave. But it has no opinion. It is pure rational, just pure analyzation of data. But a nefesh, a sichlis, and a rational soul doesn't have that. A rational soul is more than that. A rational soul will say, because of everything I just analyzed, this is the correct way to behave. That's already an emotional component, as it's at least incorporated within the world of rationality. Right? It's that you should behave or shouldn't behave. Yeah. So every nefesh has all of it. It has seichel and it has midas. It has intelligence and has an emotions. It's just a question of which one's dominant, which one dominates, and what are all these faculties being used for? And the animal soul is being used for the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, and the rational soul is in the pursuit of the truth, ideas, philosophy, science. What's the word? The advancement of human species.
Or evolution.
Or sorry, evolution, right? The advancements of like that human should evolve, or maybe if he's a speciesist, for the survival of the planet, whatever it is, right? But all of it exists. The emotions and the intelligence exist in all of the souls. Just a question of which one is being dominated by. Okay, so we'll begin here.
There's only one soul.
Huh?
They're all part of the soul.
With the animal soul, the godly soul, the conscious. We'll call it the consciousness of soul. Right? The animal conscious and then the godly conscious.
Because a lot of people misunderstand that. They think you have two souls.
You don't have, wait, no, you don't have.
We learned that you have the animal soul and the godly soul, right?
Yeah.
That's two souls. They're layers in you, but they're really two souls, right? One gets invested in the other, right? The godly soul is invested in the rational soul, which is invested in the animal soul, which is invested in the body, right? So I experience it as like one, it's layers of my babushka, right? There's my body, and then you open up another layer of my animal soul, deeper layer of my rational soul, and deeper layer of my godly soul. Okay, so this is an entryway to get us to the godly soul, which we'll do tomorrow. We'll just conclude one more thing on this subject. So we talk about the soul's experience of the self, its intelligence and its emotions, and which one dominates and which one serves what. Because again, like we said, the intelligence and emotions are opposites, but they require each other. So the question is which one becomes dominant and what purpose are they serving? The animal soul for pleasure and avoiding pain. So therefore the dominant is going to be the emotions, and the rational soul we haven't got to the godly soul yet, but for the rational soul, it's going to be seichel, it's going to be the mind is going to dominate, and everything, its emotions are also going to be in the service of that rationality. Yeah. Okay.
Well, the Nefashos promise also uses seichel.
Correct. It does. What's worthy of my pleasure? What's going to give me pain? Right. So that's why we're saying that every nefesh will have the full system of all 10 spheres, of all 10 faculties. It's just a question of which one's more dominant, and that's part of how they can communicate with each other. Right. The animal soul on its own self is only ever going to use intelligence to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. But because the godly soul is a rational soul, number one, and number two, as a rational soul, it also has an emotional component, what ought to be the right way of believing. And the animal soul has an intelligent self. So they have like some common ground because the rational soul has an emotional component and the animal soul has a rational component. So they can communicate to each other. So if I spend enough time theorizing about my philosophical way of living that I believe that the right thing is, I don't know, let's just say I came to the conclusion that utilitarianism is the right way of living, philosophically speaking. So I can get my animal soul to pursue that too. Right? Because they have common ground. And that's why they're one inside the other, right? Which is why the godly, getting back to what we said at the beginning, when the Alter Rebbe says, you, the person, can take your godly soul and make it overpower your animal soul. Who's the you he's talking to? The sichlis, the rational self. The rational self can say, oh, well, 1 second, that godly notion sounds right. And then it can talk to the animal soul and say, well, you're avoiding pain and pursuing pleasure. You know what the real pleasure is? And the real truth is, it's that, the godly soul perspective. Right? So it's like layers of me, but if the godly soul, the rational soul is that person in the middle that's choosing between the two. Right? Okay, so one more thing before we conclude. Oh, we're out of time. Just quickly before we conclude, and we'll pick up tomorrow on the godly soul, which is every soul. Right, so we're talking about the emotions and the intelligence and the emotions of each soul. Right, the intelligence and the emotions of each soul, the way the body experiences them, right, is going to be in one of three arenas, and they're progressively more external. The first is in thought. That's how I experience it myself. How do I can feel anger, but I don't have any words for it yet because I just got flared up. Or hunger is the best way to think about it. The second you get hungry, or a baby gets hungry, it doesn't necessarily think about its hunger. It just feels its hunger. It's a raw feeling. But for us, we're more mature. Within seconds of our feelings, our thoughts start to process them in words. Right. So your thoughts is the first sphere in which whatever part of your spheres, whatever part of your personality you're experiencing, whether it's intelligence, whether it's emotions, are being given language, given expression, given definition. That's in your thoughts. Level two is speech. Now I'm already projecting to someone else. Sometimes actually you'll speak for yourself also, just to help you clarify your own thoughts. Right? Because thoughts are meant to give words to how you feel or to how you think. And if you're having a hard time doing that, talk it out literally, and then like hearing it will like inform you, oh, that those are bad words, choose different words, right? But it's still going progressively outward. And even more outward is to act on them, to act on how I feel, to act on how I think, right? This is what the Alter Rebbe called the garments of the soul. The soul itself is the inside, the spheres, the intelligence, the emotions. That's the soul itself. The soul itself is its ideas and its feelings. But then the garments of the soul, the way in which it communicates those feelings or communicates those ideas, either communicate to myself, communicate to another, or make an impact on the world because of those feelings or ideas, is thought, speech, action. And therefore, every soul will have this entire system. Every soul will have ideas, every soul will have its emotions, and a soul will have its thinking about its ideas, its emotion, it's speaking about its ideas, emotions, and it's acting upon its ideas and emotions. Whether it's animal, whether it's the sichlis, whether it's the godly, they'll all have this whole system of intelligence, emotions, and then thought, speech, action. Is that clear? So it's a little bit fast, but is someone clear? Okay.
Chachma and Bina is both in Machshava.
You're both in seichel.
Okay.
So machshava should not be confused with seichel, because machshava, thought, you could think stupid things also. You could think emotional things.
But Chachma and Bina doesn't, or Seichel doesn't differentiate if the thought is good or bad. It's
Correct.
Just the initial.
It's completely pure rational.
Right. So why do you think Machshava don't mix Seichel with Machshava?
Because you could only experience your own seichel through machshava. But machshava is not exclusively a tool of seichel. Machshava, thought, is not exclusively a tool of rationality. Because thought can be about stupid things also.
Yeah, so can Chachma and Bina. No?
Not really.
Chachma means it's coming from good?
Not necessarily, but intelligence, yes. I can have intelligence that is about evil. I can have intelligence about how to steal.
Or you see, so
It's
Machshava is
intelligence.
an unintelligent.
It's just a tool
Oh,
to
it's already after the Chachma and Bina.
exactly.
It's just a tool for the yesh to
correct.
process.
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's correct. You can have a flash and idea and you have no words for it yet. You need, and even your bina, you can understand something very well, but you have to think about it still to give it words, so that way you can like file it away, or then speak it out,
For sure.
right? So the machshava is, that's why it's a lavush. It's it's what Alter calls it a clothing. It's the packaging in which the seichel will go to get it to give itself words and color, right? And the same thing with my emotions. If I feel something and I need to think about how I'm feeling to give it words, to give it proper context, and then speak it and then act on it, right? So the thought, speech, and action are the what he calls the levushim, the garments of the actual soul being the seichel and the midas, the intelligence, the emotions, and then thought, speech, and action being the garments in which the soul is expressed. And this is true of all three neshamas, whether we're talking about the nefesh bahamis, sichlis, or godly, whether we're talking about the animal, rational or godly. They all have this whole system: seichel, intelligence, emotions, and then the garments of thought, speech, action. Okay, so this will help us tomorrow, God willing. We'll understand the godly soul, and then we'll get back to Tanya. We went a little overtime. Wonderful day, Yidden.